the idea that there's an American dog in this fight is just utterly preposterous. And, and that led me to sort of and I think that's an idea that most sort of new right conservatives kind of favor. I think sort of isolationism is sort of one of the ingredients and kind of the normal mix of like the new way of
They
thinking or
even
the new
used the term. I had
ways of doing
Pedro
things.
Gonzalez on
Uh,
here who writes. He's the editor at Chronicles now, and yeah, he's even using the term
yeah, I know. Yeah.
non-interventionist.
Yeah, not
Yeah, yeah,
interventionist
yeah.
is a
Sure.
little weaker than isolationist, and I think my flavor of
Now you
isolationism
sound
is
like
much
Ron Paul.
stronger than even than anyone's. So, yeah. Well, there's isolationism, and there's isolationism was
Of course.
originally, described as a slur for like basically normal Westphalian
Yeah.
foreign policy. I'm actually an isolationist. I would actually cut off a lot of these connections, but that's a little strong. But yeah, it sort of led me to another conclusion, which was the idea that if this policy works well for the Ukraine, maybe it really should apply to all of continental Europe. And maybe, the correct US foreign policy for Europe um, should be, as I put it in kind of 19th century language, to give Russia a free hand on the continent. Because if you imagine a world like already you have this interest, you have like imagine, Trump is reelected in 2024 and his first move is basically he's like, okay, we're pulling out of NATO. NATO no longer exists. It's an
He'd have to have the
anachronism. No
nuts
longer
to do
serves any
that, but
purpose. Not only are we pulling out of NATO, he'd have to have the nuts. Yeah, we're imagining Trump with nuts. Maybe there's some kind of testosterone injections he can get. It's not too late. He comes into office and he's got these like apples under his belt, right? And you can see them on TV. I mean, it can't be hidden, right? And that's how big his nuts are. So we're imagining this hypothetical, Trump with big nuts, and he comes in and he's like, okay, here is the space where I'm determined to prove that because I was elected the chief executive of the executive branch, I'm actually the president, and I'm determined to prove it. And the one place in which, you know, it's funny, you go to DC and ask anyone who's sort of involved in the process, and I've used this line often and it never fails. I'm like, there isn't really an executive branch. What we really have is a legislative branch. And they'll be like, of course, obviously, right? But to a certain extent, foreign policy in the military still has some you can at least make a stab at exercising executive authority over that. And you can say, okay, I'm the commander in chief of the military, and I'm ordering our bases in Germany to close. I am ordering all of the troops in Germany home. Because am I the president or am I not the president? What are you going to do? Sue me? Like are you just going to not accept the orders? And that would terrify people. And it would terrify people in a really beautiful way because, of course, by closing down these bases in Germany that were meant to prevent against Hitler coming back to life or Stalin sweeping over the plains or whatever, you're destroying a lot of people's work. You're destroying a lot of people's lives. But once you close those bases down, reopening them would be really hard because people would be like, "Why
it would be
exactly
like
do we
trying
need to
to go back
occupy
into
Germany?"
Afghanistan right now.
Right? and it would be like trying to go back into Afghanistan right now. So you can actually there are ways in which you can use the very questionable power of the presidency to actually create more and more power. And, if you're imagining a Trump with nuts or rather a Trump with apples or like, grapefruit even, right? You basically say, okay, wow, here's this isolationist administration starting in 2025 and we don't have a position on any conflicts between Germany and Russia, France and Russia. Like just work that shit out, guys. You know, and that creates an effect where you could imagine, and this is where it becomes more and more speculative, you can imagine like a situation where Europe basically feels free not just to stop, but even to reverse a lot of these processes of decay. That, and so in a world where you're basically like seeing sort of regimes, maybe just a little even more like the sort of Hungarian regime, but all over Europe, because that's sort of the kind of dominant power, and that's the power that people gravitate toward. And they start sort of cleaning up a lot of these sores,